Welcome back to the Fourth Wall Podcast. In order to satisfy mature fans of superhero movies who want their films with more of an edge, we get Deadpool, we get Logan, we get Deadpool 2, all huge R-rated box office hits. Where those were R-rated for shock value, violence and gore, plus the raunchy Judd Apatow humor in Deadpool, Joker is R-rated for not just gore, but for more disturbing content and scenes as well. Joker had a pretty solid opening weekend, bringing in $94 million at the box office, and that's on par with the Deadpools and Logan.
And that was on a budget of just $55 million. Most superhero movies cost double that amount, so we've learned the experiment of giving a DC property the Scorsese treatment can be a very profitable one indeed. In its second week, the Joker is up to $500 million worldwide. So what's it about? It's about a guy named Arthur Fleck who wants to be a stand-up comedian.
And finally, in a world where everyone thinks they could do my job, check out this guy.
When I was a little boy and told people I was going to be a comedian, everyone laughed at me. Well, no one's laughing now.
You can say that again, pal.
And he lives a pretty rough life in a grungy apartment with his mom. He works as a clown, kind of holding a sign outside of business establishments and in children's hospitals. But he has some mental health issues, and he's trying to balance those against living in a large city that's hostile towards him.
Yeah, and just a quick spoiler warning. We're obviously talking about the Joker in this episode. We're not going to talk about some major plot turns at the end or anything, but we're going to be talking about the movie quite a bit. So you probably will want to have seen the Joker before listening to this.
And there's a lot to get into. So first, let's kind of talk about the setting. I thought that was interesting, and it's really important to the film. Gotham in this movie is it's like a powder keg waiting to erupt. And you can tell it's a reference to today's political climate. And but in the film, it's really due to the sort of economic inequality that's going on. There's a very clear divide between the rich and poor. And Gotham is very focused on industry in this version of Gotham, and not really on the lower class, the people. In fact, even on some of the license plates, it says industry first or something like that. So we see rich people in Gotham going about their rich people lives, attending screenings of movies. One of them's a Charlie Chaplin movie, and Charlie's playing this downtrodden everyman, and the rich people are in their fancy theaters just sort of laughing at his plight. That point is made very well in the movie. And even at one point, Arthur is impacted by city budget cuts, and that kind of sets in motion much of what follows. So overall, I think they had a nice tie between the macro and the micro side of things. In the 1970s, which is when this takes place, it's supposed to be like a 1970s Martin Scorsese movie. It was well done, but sometimes it did feel a little bit like modern times. So for example, there's one part where a video goes viral, which is weird for the time period, but very much relates to us, of course, today. Zach, what did you think of the setting of the movie?
Yeah, you mentioned Arthur, Joaquin Phoenix's character, the Joker. He was suffering in that city, and there's one scene where he's talking to a social worker, and he's just like, it's crazy out there, the city. And then the social worker's just like, yeah, obviously. And it was a depressing scene, and then you're just thinking man, what's wrong with this city? So yeah, it's not a very happy place. Gotham isn't in this. And yeah, like you said, Scorsese vibes all over it. You're a big Scorsese fan. What did you think? Is this movie what did you think of Martin Scorsese's influence on Joker?
He was originally attached as a producer on the film, and I think, if I were to guess, part of the reason why he started to pull away from it is because it is so similar to stuff he's already done. He doesn't want to direct a movie that's a repeat of some of his earlier work. The ones that come up, of course, over and over again are King of Comedy and Taxi Driver. But I think there's actually a lot more King of Comedy in here than there is Taxi Driver.
What is King of Comedy? Just for the audience who hasn't seen it.
King of Comedy is a 80s movie directed by Martin Scorsese, and Robert De Niro's in it. and he plays a mentally disturbed individual who wants to be a famous stand-up comedian. And he's delusional, and he, imagines himself on a late-night talk show that he watches. And the talk show is very reminiscent of the one in this film and in the trailers and all that stuff. And like the Joker, Robert De Niro's character, named Rupert Pupkin, his jokes aren't any good. So he's not a good stand-up comedian. He just really, really wants it, and he's sort of mentally disturbed. So he ends up stalking the host of that TV show, and then eventually, Robert De Niro as Rupert Pupkin goes on the air and does a set after he's kind of hijacked the show. So for me, there were some spoilers, just having seen that movie. And so hopefully it wasn't spoiled for you. I would highly recommend King of Comedy. It's a great movie. Robert De Niro does a good job. But I kind of knew what to expect because of that. It was going very much kind of the same way. And really, I think that's a theme throughout the whole movie, is that the audience knows what they're in for going in. They've seen the trailers of a mentally disturbed dude, and they know who the Joker character is, and they know that he has to go from one point to the other. They kind of see it coming the whole time. That being said, I think they did it pretty well.
Yeah, there is, when you're watching a movie like The Joker, you kind of ask yourself, do I think this is a movie that's inspired by other stuff, or is this a movie that's blatantly borrowing ideas, and then it's really just up to you to decide. I think it's fair to say that movies like Taxi Driver, King of Comedy, they're in their own genre of sort of reaching a breaking point, loner dude in a big city. I'd say that itself is a genre, and Scorsese is definitely the king of it. The movie that comes to mind the most when I think of Joker is You Were Never Really Here. This is the second time in the past few years where Joaquin Phoenix has played a loner weirdo that lives in a big city, taking care of his mom, and is a very lethal person. I felt like Joker and You Were Never Really Here, I feel like these two are basically almost 75% the same movie in a lot of ways. It's up to you whether you think, oh, this is totally influenced by Scorsese or this is original. I think it still holds up as an original movie. It's its own idea. So yeah, there's Scorsese influences. I wouldn't say that's the only influence. Definitely some Christopher Nolan influence. Cody, what do you think about Christopher Nolan's influence in The Joker?
Yeah, it was definitely there. He was the first one to kind of take a comic book movie very seriously. And I think this is yet another step in that realistic treatment of a comic book movie direction. And I think it works. DC should definitely take note of this. And I think it's what distinguishes them from Marvel, both in the comics and in the movies. DC is much more realistic, and Marvel's a little more fantastical. And this movie definitely leans into that direction. I don't know if they could take it another step in the reality direction. The Batman Begins trilogy was one step. This is another step. I think you'd have to go a little more intense to take it yet another step in that direction. I think this is about as far as I'd want to see them go for now.
Yeah, going into Joker, I was pretty curious how it would feel. I didn't expect Marvel vibes, but I was curious to see if it felt more like the recent DC movies, like Batman vs. Superman, or more like older Batman movies. And after seeing it, I'd say that it's closest to Nolan's Batmans with Christian Bale. The color palettes were identical, and if you've seen the movie, you know what I mean. The cinematography obviously was way different, but I feel like just like the color of the city, the costumes and the sets, they look like identical sets just taken from The Dark Knight sometimes. But of course, Nolan movies have a very specific feel and pace, and the Joker doesn't try to go in that direction at all. You don't need to be at Christopher Nolan's pace to tell a good Batman story, and Joker definitely took its time.
And I feel like this one was more of a serious movie than any of those. Christopher Nolan's, they did have their moments of silliness. For example, in Dark Knight Rises, when when he pulls up in the bat jet and the cop's hat flies off. It's just a silly little moment. Christopher Nolan had a few of those. This has none of that. It definitely takes it even more seriously than some of those films. And I think that's due to the director, Todd Phillips. This is a very different kind of movie for him. He's traditionally a comedy director. This wasn't really a funny movie. Like, did you laugh at all in this movie?
When I laughed, it was like uncomfortable laughs. It wasn't like ironic laughs or anything. It was like nervous laughter.
It didn't have any Marvel humor, which is appreciated. But Todd Phillips is mostly known for like Road Trip, Old School, the Hangover movies, that kind of humor. So going in, I was, like you, very skeptical. I was curious what I would see. He didn't really do any of that. It's like he was trying to be an auteur. Like you said, the cinematography was different from Nolan's. I think it was a little more considered than some of those movies. And Todd Phillips did both the writing and directing. And I think both were really great. What did you think about Todd Phillips' direction?
Todd Phillips is, maybe he wants to take a different direction in his career. And maybe he made this movie a little bit too serious at times to overcompensate for his reputation as a comedic director. But overall, I feel like he proved that he belonged in making these kind of disturbing movies. He's really proved himself as kind of a multi-faceted director with this movie, The Joker.
And I think he got a strong assist, of course, from Joaquin Phoenix, who you mentioned earlier. Everybody's saying it. This is a great performance. He always turns in a good one. I think we were both super curious going in. How would Joaquin Phoenix approach the Joker? And I think at this point, Jared Leto and now this, they're trying to not be Heath Ledger. This one is not Heath Ledger because he was kind of like a mastermind. And you felt like throughout The Dark Knight that Heath Ledger's Joker had everything under control. It was his whole plan that was rolling out all this chaos. This Joker is not that powerful throughout most of the movie. He's just a kind of a sad, lonely guy.
Yeah, that's a good point. In The Dark Knight, Heath Ledger, his Joker was just inexplicably amazing at everything. He's able to coordinate massive heists, get in and out of where he needs to be. He can command the room when he's negotiating with mobsters. But this Joker is just like struggling. You're just like, he just doesn't seem like a very able person. The Dark Knight Joker was just like full of joy, just like happy as can be, where Joaquin Phoenix's Joker is just like, you really like feel for the guy. You're like, man, he's got it rough. And I think there was one line where he said he's never been happy a day in his life. And you're just like, geez, like I feel really bad for this guy. And there's no secrets to this Joker. They don't really explain Heath Ledger's Joker and really why the way he is. There's the scenes where he explains how he got the scars on his face 3 times, and it's all different stories. It's basically those movies saying, like, we're not going to explain anything about Heath Ledger's Joker. But Joaquin Phoenix's Joker, you understand every step of the way how he became the Joker. There's no mystery, like, really at all to it.
I would actually push back on that. There is some mystery. The Joker has a famous line in the comics where he says, if I have a past, I prefer it to be multiple choice. And I think this film does do that. It checks that box. It has a multiple choice option that you can choose which way it goes. But you're right. We do understand sort of the motivations behind why he is the way he is, which we didn't in the Dark Knight trilogy. 2
things stand out to me: the laughing and the dancing. The laughing was great. It was super uncomfortable to watch in the different situations, and I like how they tied the laughing to an illness that causes him to laugh whenever he's reacting emotionally to something. And I guess Joaquin Phoenix himself, the actor, studied this illness in real life for the character. So there was like a medical explanation for why this Joker laughed like he did. Joaquin Phoenix would be in an uncomfortable situation, and normally where somebody would, in his case, cry or run away, he would just go, but it was tied to the medical conditions, so it all Like, there was no plot holes in that. It was all explained. The dancing, though. There was 3 times in The Joker where Arthur is just dancing gleefully. You know, the music starts playing and he's becoming more comfortable with himself, or something happened and he's dancing to kind of celebrate. First time was understandable, but the second and third, I just felt like the movie is trying too hard to win some statues.
I thought it was kind of cool, actually. It was kind of a creepy. The way he moved was weird, and Joaquin Phoenix lost a lot of weight for this role.
I really believe that Arthur needs to look hungry and wolf-like and malnourished, and it was a bit of a conversation, and then he just started losing the weight. He lost, I think, 52 pounds.
And he was able to kind of move his body in some weird ways, some creepy ways. He said he based the dancing off of an old Ray Bolger performance called The Old Soft Shoe. And I went back and watched that clip, and it's actually pretty close. I mean, it's a really sort of weird dance, and I would encourage you to check out that clip. It gives a little context to the dancing. We did get a little bit of a glimpse of Joaquin Phoenix as the Joker, being very showy and outgoing.
One small thing.
Yeah.
When you bring me out, can you introduce me as Joker?
And I hope, if we ever see this character again, played by this actor, that he really does more of that, because that, to me, is the Joker. The Joker is a showman. He hijacks the television station, and he does his antics and all that kind of stuff. He's not a sad, depressed guy.
Yeah, that's a fair point, and that would actually make the dancing make more sense. He's just so happy dude. After Suicide Squad came out, there was a consensus that Jared Leto's Joker doesn't even compare to Heath's. With Joaquin Phoenix's Joker, I'd say the convo will be more of it's a different type of Joker rather than he's worse or the Dark Knight Joker is better. I think they'll be compared as, comparing apples to oranges. So I think that's like a huge accomplishment. Like, those are huge shoes to fill.
Joaquin Phoenix isn't the only famous actor in the movie. We also have to mention Robert De Niro quickly. This is in reference to King of Comedy, which we got into a little bit earlier, this Rupert Pupkin guy.
So it was somewhat of an influence for this film, of course, and De Niro being the star of that movie. I basically sent the script to Bob when we came up with that character. And I thought, this would be interesting if we get Bob to do this.
The problem with this was I didn't really buy him as a charismatic late-night host, right? Robert De Niro's acting style is a little too understated. I don't think Robert De Niro was a great casting choice other than as a nod to the Scorsese movie. It probably made some of the surprise moments a little more meaningful because it's a star of Robert De Niro's caliber being involved with them. But I think it could have been somebody else. Maybe Jack Nicholson, for example, I think could have done a good job. And you would have changed it from a Scorsese reference to a Joker reference.
I didn't really see Robert De Niro in the movie as a problem at all. Yeah, his character was kind of a caricature of a late night host. He reminded me of Jay Leno more than anyone for some reason. But yeah, I can see how you would say like it felt like he was almost planted in this movie. There's 2 sides to Robert De Niro's character. There's the funny one that's hosting the show, and I feel like anybody could have played that. That was totally fine. And then there was one scene, though, where Robert De Niro's talking to Joaquin Phoenix, like in the green room preparing for the show, and then you see his more cutthroat business side. Maybe if they had Jack Nicholson in there, he could have been a little bit more threatening or nasty. Robert De Niro's character, was he super memorable? No, but I don't really think it really affected the movie.
Jack Nicholson was in the original Batman as the Joker. It's a Batman movie in a way, right? Even though we don't see Batman. We see a young Bruce Wayne, of course, in the trailer, so that's not giving anything away. And there are, as you would expect, some nods to his future as Batman. And there are a couple moments, and I'm not going to get into them here because they would be spoilers, but if you're a Batman fan, you'll see it and be like, wow, okay, that makes some things make sense. But as a comic book movie, this is a DC property. They need to catch up, right? They have to try new things. Zach, do you think this is the right direction for them?
I think this is the only direction for them. Yeah, you're right. They do have to try new things. And so as they do that over time, we're going to get a lot more styles and concepts from DC in their attempt to make hit movies, big blockbuster movies. We do get duds like the Green Lantern and Suicide Squad, but we also get Wonder Woman and Aquaman. Let's not forget about Christian Bale, Batman's either. There's no chance Christopher Nolan would be able to make his Batman trilogy his way under the Marvel banner. The fact that DC isn't limited to a shared universe like Marvel is huge. For every Marvel film, just to make sense, the whole story must revolve around one continuous universe. We even saw them run into some problems with Endgame because of this. But for DC, a standalone Joker movie with nothing to do with any Batman movie that we know of, that's no problem.
This is maybe a film that they could, build a universe from in the same way that Iron Man was and Batman Begins was. They could use this as a starting point if they wanted to go the shared universe route. But this was cool. I mean, they showed us, it's almost like an Elseworld story. They showed us a version of what the Joker's origin story could be like. Wrapping up, overall, I would say an 8 out of 10. I think Todd Phillips knocked it out of the park. And I do think this is a good direction for comic book movies. We've talked about Marvel fatigue in past episodes, these kind of disposable, light, happy movies. This is something different, and people wanted something different. They wanted something a little more artistic, and this is it. And I think Todd Phillips did a good job.
So you give it an 8 out of 10. I'm going to have to say a 7 out of 10. I thought the Joker was a great Joaquin Phoenix performance, but the story around him, everything else wasn't very memorable.
All right, speaking of fatigue, I'm starting to get Joker fatigue. So let's move on to our recommendations from the last episode.
So in each episode of the Fourth Wall podcast, I'll recommend a movie for Cody to watch, and then Cody will recommend a movie for me to watch, and then we'll watch it, and then we'll discuss what we think on the next episode. So during our last episode, Cody recommended that I watch a movie called Persona. Cody, could you give us a synopsis of Persona, what that movie was about, what I was getting myself into?
Persona is Ingmar Bergman's 1966 psychological drama, and it's about an aging actress who's developing a new persona and the impact that has on her family. So she spends some time kind of away from it all after freezing up on stage. She spends some time in the Swedish country, and she possibly goes slightly mad. The film has gained quite a following among art film critics, and what I've found to be kind of the magic of it is that when you first watch it, you think there's a lot of just randomness for art's sake. But then as you kind of start to think through it, through the lens of what's actually happening, adopting this new persona, some of those things that you thought were random start to take on a new meaning, and they start to kind of make sense after thinking about it for a while. So, Zach, what did you think about Persona?
So I watched the movie, and then I did what you said. But I went on YouTube and started watching some analysis. So before that, I gave the movie a 6 out of 10. Then I watched a YouTube video about it and a couple more, and then 6 out of 10 still. Okay. Here's my experience. So I turned on Persona. I had popcorn ready and was totally focused on watching your recommendation. The movie starts and there's a bunch of random images and shots that make no sense, like spiders, random shots of movie projectors booting up. There's just a kid we haven't seen before sitting on a table with an image of a lady behind him being projected. Just makes zero sense. I was glad I had a lot of popcorn because I knew this was going to be an artsy movie, but I wasn't expecting just watching a movie with just bizarre art house shots that don't have any apparent meaning at all. But luckily, as you said, as we talked about, this is just an overture for the film. Old school movies did that. Once that little 5-minute weird thing ended and a story started to develop, I was able to relax and get into this movie. Let's start with what I liked. The overall aesthetic of the movie is interesting. This is a Swedish movie. The Swedish have a reputation for being really good at portraying dark subject matter, like the movie Let the Right One In and the Girl with the Dragon Tattoo series. And this one had a similar kind of lifeless, hopeless feel to it. Another thing I liked about Persona is the majority of the movie is the nurse, Alma, monologuing to and interacting with her celebrity patient, a famous actress who won't speak at all, which the doctor says is caused by a lack of willpower and not any other medical cause. They start to form a bond as Alma treats Elizabeth, the celebrity, and then they end up moving from a hospital to a cottage by the sea in an effort to get Elizabeth to speak again. Alma, the nurse, talks to and communicates with her patient about a bunch of stuff throughout and tells stories, and it's enjoyable and intriguing stuff, and it's good dialogue. That's what I liked about the movie. What I didn't like, there was just nothing at stake for me at all when I was watching this movie. The unexplained weirdness of this movie just made me feel like Persona was more of a visual experience rather than a story where I felt like everything would add up in the end. I did what you said, and I watched some analysis videos on YouTube talking about Persona, and that's cool that there's a lot of themes about identity and duality, but Persona is so cryptic of a movie that whatever ideas they're trying to explore aren't adding to the story in any way, in my opinion.
The movie is basically Edward Norton becoming Brad Pitt in Fight Club. It's Elliot becoming Mr. Robot and Mr. Robot. In some ways, it's Anakin becoming Darth Vader. But really, I think a better example is it's Miley Cyrus becoming the modern Miley Cyrus that we know. It's Elizabeth becoming Alma. Starts out, she doesn't want a kid. She wants to be that, sexy actress. And then another persona, Alma, comes along, and she's more of a caretaker. And so Elizabeth spends time with her in the country, and Alma had a situation where she did not have kids, and you'd have to see the movie. I don't want to spoil it. But Elizabeth's husband then visits and tells this Alma persona that she needs to come home and take care of her kid. Well, this is Elizabeth's kid, so she's obviously a little bit confused, right? And then, of course, towards the end, now Alma takes over, and she leaves the country, and cameras are following her and things like that. The kid you mentioned who's looking at the projector is Elizabeth's kid, who she never wanted, and she's been off being an actress. And it's interesting because the shot that's being projected fades between Elizabeth and Alma, and that's really how it is for the kid. He only sees his mom through the projector of a movie screen, and he can't really tell which persona he's seeing. For me, this was a gorgeous movie. It was visual storytelling at its best, and I would give it probably a 10 out of 10. Maybe 9 out of 10 because you're right, it could have definitely been a little more accessible.
So it sounds like what you're saying is the only reason I don't like it as much as you do is because I don't understand it at the level that you do.
No. I didn't like it either, like I mentioned. It does take a lot. You have to work to figure out what it's saying. And that's why maybe I would give it a point off. Everything I thought was just random and didn't make sense. When I thought about it a little bit more, it actually did make sense. I don't know. It was an interesting thing. I hadn't had that happen in many movies. Usually it's like you walk out and you kind of know how you feel about it. Whereas I did a 180 on this one.
Yeah, some other thoughts on this movie. I did some Googling on Persona. And this movie, like you were kind of saying, has insanely high praise. And honestly, I don't totally understand it. I'm seeing it being called the film equivalent of climbing Mount Everest, whatever that means. It's being mentioned with Citizen Kane. There's got to be some serious context I'm ignorant of with this movie Persona.
I would say it's better than Citizen Kane. Citizen Kane was, the invention of the modern movie. First time we ever saw a ceiling on camera, all that fun stuff. Citizen Kane gave us the Marvel movies. Persona, I would say, was the invention of modern cinema. It's more of an experience than a film. So that's kind of how I would explain it.
So I'd say that we both agree that for a first time viewing experience, Persona might be not too easy to enjoy, but it's just so cryptic. I think when it comes to cryptic movies, they can be good and they can be intriguing still, even if you don't understand it. A good example of this would be the monoliths in 2001: A Space Odyssey. When you watch 2001, you don't necessarily understand it, but you're just so darn curious that you look forward to like the analysis of it and fan theories of what do you think these monoliths are, who put them there, why are they there, what do they mean. And with Persona, after I watched it, I wasn't inspired to go look up the meanings of stuff like I was in 2001.
So it's not for everybody. In fact, when I recommended it to you, I didn't think you would like it. So a 6 out of 10 is actually a surprising score for this one. Zach, you recommended Life is Beautiful to me. Can you tell us a little bit about that one?
Life is Beautiful, released in 1997. It is a World War II Holocaust movie which takes place in Italy, 1939. And it's mainly about a Jewish Italian guy named Guido who starts a business and a family in this Italian town. And eventually one day the Nazis come and they send his family to a concentration camp. That makes it seem like a really serious and sad movie. And Life is Beautiful is definitely a sad movie and a serious movie, but there's also tons of laughs. The father, our main character, Guido, just has an electric personality, and the creative ways he comes with to protect his family are both extremely noble and hilarious at the same time. I don't want to say too much about it, Cody. It's my recommendation for you. So what did you think of Life is Beautiful?
I liked it. Probably not as much as some of the critics at the time. It was nominated for 7 Academy Awards, including Best Actor and Director for Roberto Benigni. And it took home 3 Academy Awards. So the critics, there was definitely some herding going on. They all got into the Life is Beautiful camp to award it those accolades. Maybe justifiably so. It was good. It does a good job at contrast. So the first act is kind of a slapstick love story, and Zach was saying it's not all, depressing and dark. The second and third acts are really a sad drama with a few moments of levity. It was interesting to see a movie kind of change gears so quickly, and I think it worked in this case because that's what it was like back then. Their lives were completely upended. We start out in this beautiful Italian village where Roberto Benigni is trying to court his future wife, and most of it's just really sweet. It was actually an adorable little love story. But Zach, as you know from my Hot Fuzz review, I'm not as into like slapstick kind of stuff, so some of those moments went a little far for me. When it was good, it reminded me of Charlie Chaplin, who we mentioned earlier. When it wasn't good, I was just kind of rolling my eyes, like dropping a flower pot on someone's head and then smashing an egg, It just, I don't know, that's not as funny to me. In the first act, we got a few lighter moments foreshadowing kind of the rest of the movie. At one point, Roberto Benigni's character Guido asks another character what their political beliefs are, and that character calls in his 2 sons into the room, and he's like, "Hey, Benito, Adolf, get in here." Of course, referencing Benito Mussolini and Adolf Hitler. I definitely chuckled at that, and there were a few moments like that where it was kind of making light of that time period. And of course, the production design outside of the concentration camp was gorgeous. It takes place in Italy, and it has some amazing interiors and exteriors, both kind of the small village and the ornate, rich interiors that we're used to. Inside the camp, of course, though, it's drab and depressing, and I thought that contrast was interesting. Once he and his son are in the camp, like I said, it kind of does a 180. Throughout the latter half of the movie, Guido is trying to convince his son the whole thing is a game. And the son only barely believes him. The kid kind of knows what's going on. He's like, "I don't know, Dad. This looks a little bit like mass genocide. I mean, of course, he doesn't say that, but he's very suspicious of his dad. But there were some clever moments with the relationship between the dad and the son. And the kid was great. For example, he never wants to take a shower or a bath, and he's really good at kind of sneaking away from them. So then once they're in the camp, that ends up saving his life because the kid doesn't want to take a shower. And that was how they got the children and the older people sent to their death in the camp. So most of it was just really sad. And the moments of levity became more and more infrequent as conditions inside the camp got worse.
Another scene kind of in the same spirit of that. There's a scene where there's a bunch of the inmates at the concentration camp, and they're all in their bunks, and then this big, serious Nazi soldier walks in, and he's yelling at the inmates, and then the dad, he says that he can translate for the people, and then so he goes up by the soldier and translates a German that to Italian that the soldier's saying, and then he just instead of translating what he's saying it's like they're playing a game of hide and seek, and he's explaining the rules, and so that way the son thinks that they're just playing games at a camp instead of the serious stuff that the soldier's actually saying to the inmates at this concentration camp.
Yeah, that was a good moment. And I also liked how the fellow prisoners played along. You know, they saw the little boy and they didn't want him to be scared. And even though they were probably headed towards their eventual death, they wanted to make this kid's experience, you know, they wanted to play along with the ruse. So that was really sweet. There's one moment in particular that I thought stood above the rest when Roberto Benigni is carrying his son and he is confronted with the horror of what's going on in the camp in a really visceral way. And it's foggy and his son is sleeping. And I think that was symbolizing the fog he had created around this horrible experience, putting his son to sleep in a way. I thought that was really beautiful. And I only had really one issue with the story where a character dies because it felt like the writer wanted them to die and not for any real reason. You know, they didn't sacrifice themselves or there wasn't any kind of nobility behind it. Really, the character could have done nothing in this instance and survived. So that was kind of like, maybe I think they could have done more with that. More of a missed opportunity than a negative, though. Overall, I felt like Roberto did a great job at doing what he set out to do in front of and behind the camera. And there were some memorable moments. So did I love it? No. It's a very simple, very small movie, but I liked it. And I would probably give it like a 7 out of 10.
Okay, that's fair. But I still think that everybody should watch it. And when it comes to World War II movies, it's one of the top in the library.
All right, so Zach, what do you have for me for the next episode?
Cody, I want you to watch the 1986 release Labyrinth, starring David Bowie and Jennifer Connelly. Bowie's character is legendary in this movie, and Jennifer Connelly, you know, one of the greatest distraught performance actors of all time, and she shows that off here in one of her early films. I'm not sure if it's a great movie or there's just a lot of nostalgia for me, but it is objectively memorable, and the soundtrack is untouchable.
I'm looking forward to it. I will warn you, I'm not a huge fan of musicals or 80s music, so hopefully that won't ruin the film for me. But for you, there's one I've had on the list for a while, but another film has always kind of seemed like a better fit for whatever we were talking about, or just I wanted to get your take on it. But it's my boy, Brian De Palma, who is the director of Scarface. It's a 1981 low-budget exploitation neo-noir conspiracy thriller called Blowout, and it's starring a young John Travolta. And actually, in the Joker movie, there was a billboard or at least a marquee on a theater that was showing that it was playing this film. So I took that as a sign that I have to recommend it to you finally. And it also has John Lithgow playing a bad guy. So if you've seen season 4 of Dexter, it should be fun. You will have to excuse some of the acting in this one as very 1970s. I just actually rewatched it. But it's low budget, and for me, the poor acting is kind of part of it. This isn't poor acting on John Travolta's part or John Lithgow, don't worry. But for me, it's kind of the first of the style made famous by Quentin Tarantino. It's very referential of other movies that came before it, but it's more like a Tarantino movie in that it's an art film that's in the crime genre with broad appeal. This is definitely an early example of that kind of movie. So I'm hoping this isn't going to be as challenging of a film as some of the other ones I've recommended, and that you'll be able to kind of sit back and enjoy it.
Sounds good. All right, so that about wraps up this episode. Just FYI, you can find us on iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, etc., Podcast Republic. If you're watching on YouTube, see the links to podcast apps in the description. And make sure to share this episode and our podcast with 100 people. And yeah, that's all. Thank you so much for listening. And then if there's a podcast app that you want to hear the podcast on, but it's not on there, just let us know in the comments or however you want to, and we can add it to that platform. It's really easy.
Thanks everybody again for listening, and make sure to check out the movies we talked about in this episode or in the next episode. See you next time.